Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Wanda Polson-Holman. I'm the clinical director at Little Warriors Be Brave Ranch. Thanks so much for joining today. We have about an hour together, and our hope is that we can share some important information and updates regarding human trafficking. With me today is Maggie Layton. Maggie is the bilingual partnership specialist at the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, as well as Sergeant Roland Missick. And Sergeant Missick is with the Human Trafficking Provincial Coordinator, Alberta RCMP. We are going to be talking today about human trafficking and with a specific focus from the perspective of children, youth, and families. This webinar is supported by Victims of Survivors of Crime Week grant from the Department of Justice. We just want to start by sharing some valuable statistics. First and foremost, we just want to talk a little bit about understanding why we're coming together today. The statistics that are coming out through Statistics Canada more recently are quite startling. And in this first slide here, just noting that the vast majority of victims of human trafficking in Canada are women and girls, and a quarter of victims are children and youth. Female victims aged 18 to 24 are accounted for the largest percentage of victims. And the second slide here, 80% of human trafficking incidents occur in urban metropolitan areas. And I'm sure that we'll be talking a little bit more from all three perspectives, giving some up-to-date information. Current concerning statistics in Canada, according to Statistics Canada as of 2022, is that there's trafficking for sexual exploitation. And what we're understanding and seeing is that this is highly gendered and disproportionately impacting women and girls. Vulnerable youth and adults who experience economic marginalization are also at a higher risk. And 1 in 4 survivors of human trafficking are children and youth. Human trafficking is consistently linked to various mental health concerns, including higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And what we're also seeing is that there's a larger proportion of youth girls than boys that are accused of human trafficking. And there's mixed and limited research that's suggesting that women and girls may be perceived as more trustworthy and are possibly also involved with regard to having had previously been involved as a former victim and survivor. Of note, and as we talk about things moving forward, those identified most at risk are women and girls, youth and young adults, as well as Indigenous people. I'm going to take a moment now to just give an update and an overview of our program at Little Warriors. At Little Warriors, we are a not-for-profit organization. We serve children, youth, and families from across Canada. We have an in-person intensive treatment center for child, adolescents, and families who have a sexual abuse trauma history. We also have an online program called the Be Brave Bridge program, and the Be Brave Bridge program supports children, teens, as well as families in understanding and recognizing treatment, also building accessibility to various treatment options while on a wait list, and supporting families and caregivers to understand how to best support their child who has been involved with child sexual abuse. We have a continuum of care as well. And for those of you who may be interested, we have a Prevent It program where we serve about 4,000 Canadians across Canada and also into the US and Europe. And our Prevent It program is developed in conjunction with the University of Alberta. And this program supports caregivers as well as teachers, other professionals, and those really working with children and youth to understand how to recognize the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse, but also how to understand the myths and to be able to address concerns that are brought forward to them if a child discloses. What we are seeing at Little Warriors over the past 5 years since the pandemic is an increased acuity in cases and presentation. We're also seeing an increased concern with regard to aspects of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as issues within the family system. We are noting an increased need to support staff and frontline caregivers from a trauma-informed perspective. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that as this presentation moves forward. We serve children ages 8 to 12, and our youth program is for 13 to 18-year-olds. And we also have recently, in the last year, completed a pilot program, and we are moving forward with a family program where we are supporting children, youth, and families who have been impacted by child sexual abuse, but who also have an intergenerational trauma history. What we are seeing with regard to the needs of our clients is that there's a complex presentation clinically from the perspective of not only their trauma with regard to child sexual abuse, but mental health and addiction concerns. We are seeing that our clients are needing to have flexible and adaptive ways that we can support them. So not just through intensive in-person services, but online. And we have developed a very robust support program in between treatment rounds. We also have a clear understanding that our staff need to be well aware of culture, gender, as well as family system issues. And there's a need for very involved advocacy, because without it, we're seeing that children, youth, and families are falling between the gaps or don't know exactly how to navigate the system on their own. With regard to our staff, we have a program that we support our staff, and I'll be chatting a little bit more about this at the end of this presentation regarding addressing compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. We also have developed our programming with regard to building supports for staff, as well as performance appraisals and feedback from the perspective of technical and behavioral competencies. And we continue to do our best to create awareness for the public and build partnerships with stakeholders and others who are engaged to understand what we're seeing with regard to dynamics and demographics that are maybe not so commonly understood. I'm going to pass it over to Sergeant Missick to talk about his work in the K Division at the RCMP Human Trafficking Unit.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to acknowledge the work that Little Warriors does, and being an ally of the RCMP through, our victim referral process, and also being a facility that would accept youth in our PSECA program who are victims of child sexual abuse and involved in human trafficking. So thank you for the work you do. I've only got a few minutes, and I want to leave most of this presentation for the good work that Little Warriors is doing. So briefly, an overview, essentially as a result of our national human trafficking review called Project Safekeeping, a bunch of national recommendations were made. And this position in Alberta was created in February of 2023, where the operational goals and mandate were quickly established in 3 priority focus areas, that being human trafficking file reviews, analysis and quality assurance, insurance. We wanted to make sure that these files are being reported, investigated, scored appropriately for statistical purposes. Number two is education, developing a strategy to educate our frontline members in understanding the offenses involved in labor and sex trafficking. Identifying indicators of trafficking situations and engaging the victim survivors in a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach, and connecting survivors with appropriate supports and resources in our community. We know this is a all hands on deck approach, and we need to really take a no borders approach in these investigations, meaning that we can't just think that it's that they're happening in a silo or these crimes are happening in one area. They're interprovincial across the country and sometimes international in nature. The third priority was advocacy and crime prevention. So understanding who the RCMP's partners are in investigative roles. In Alberta, we have a couple of different investigative teams here. We have the ALERT, which is the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, Human Trafficking Counter Exploitation Units in Edmonton and Calgary. With respectively 6 or 7 detectives in Edmonton and Calgary that cover the entire province as far as sex trafficking investigations go. And then we lean on our partners with Canada Border Services and our provincial government divisions that take on our labor trafficking investigations, including our federal serious organized crime branch. So just talking a little bit about education. When we review the investigations, I have an analyst who comes in and pulls all the files on a weekly basis. I get to look at them and make sure that they're being investigated properly. Victims are having statements taken in a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach. They're being offered the supports that are required. And we always like to say that the victim comes first. We want to make sure that beyond criminal charges and anything like that, we want to make sure that the victims are receiving the supports that they need. Couple of things that we always bring up in our training is believe the victim, take the trauma-informed, victim-centered approach, and offer supports. If you know who to call, if you don't know to call, they can reach out to me and I can connect them with those appropriate supports in our communities. And first and foremost is the victim safety. We teach our frontline members and traffic workers about indicators of sex trafficking. How would you identify these things? And when you do see them, for example, what are the next processes that you put into place? These sessions run anywhere from 1 hour. I'll do 1 hour sessions for our watches across the province. And I also host full day workshops in Edmonton and Calgary and throughout the province in partnership with our federal serious organized crime people, people from our alert teams. And it covers the whole gamut of labor trafficking, sex trafficking, as well as the supports that are available to them. And with that, it's just to reinforce the fact that we can't treat these files in silos, and that we again need to take a no borders approach when we're focusing on investigating these crimes. As far as crime prevention, we work with detachments on a number of different crime prevention initiatives. Currently in Northern Alberta, we have 2 major centers that we're working with investigators as well as non-government agencies and people involved in the hotel and hospitality industry. We've come up with presentations and initiatives for the hotel industry where we can post a QR code, for example, in the lobby of these hotels. In the event there is a survivor or victim of human trafficking, they can quickly access the contact number, the 1-888 number for the human trafficking hotline, and be connected with supports in their community as well as law enforcement. The other initiatives we're also part of are school education initiatives, and we have a couple of different presentations gauged at junior high and high school age students that are to be presented through our community safety and well-being branch, and I've made those presentations available to our school resource officers. And again, it covers all of the things that are important for youth to recognize the signs that either they themselves are being exploited or a friend of theirs is going through a situation where they may be being exploited or a victim of trafficking and don't know exactly how to reach out or ask for help. So the third part is the crime prevention piece. And we're partnered with a national network of coordinators. I'm part of a national working group where we can quickly share information and intelligence from province to province. Say we have a traffic stop that happens in Northern Alberta. I can quickly connect with, say, a detective or an investigator in Montreal or Toronto. If individuals in the vehicle are from that room and there's suspected trafficking, or they get flagged as being part of a, alert in a trafficking investigation. So again, we work with the public education system, as well as our NGOs and other government agencies in the province, to try to put out public service announcements and social media bits about human trafficking awareness. So the benefits of all of these things that we've talked about here today is just having intelligence-led policing and providing training for our regular members, which allow us to, first of all, identify these things in our communities, two, have them reported, and three, know who to call for help when they need it. And I am basically an arm's length reach contact person for any of our police officers in the province to be connected with either the investigative supports or the victim supports that they need. One of them being our Little Warriors Foundation Be Brave Ranch. In the event one of our survivors makes contact with our victim services unit, they can quickly reach out and start the intake process with Little Warriors. So thank you so much again for having me here, and appreciate you letting me have a little bit of your time. This is just a list of all the training available to our frontline members. So we have, like I mentioned, the full day workshops. We also have online courses, which are mandatory to be taken to work in the human trafficking unit. We also have a course put on. It's a 4-hour course through the CPKN network, and it is a survivor-led 4-hour module. It was being developed by Tamia Nagy, who is herself a survivor of sex trafficking. She came overseas to answer an ad as a nanny in Toronto, and ended up being trafficked for months before she was able to escape. And now she is a huge advocate and has helped develop this training, which lets officers see and identify what they're dealing with from the survivor's perspective, the things that they're feeling when we encounter them, the roadblocks and barriers that they are facing from their perspective, and then teaching us how we can essentially overcome those things and assist the individual who needs the help they do in that trauma-informed, victim-centered approach. And there's also some training that is accessible online through the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons. So that is also available to our members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergeant Missick. I'm going to turn it over to Maggie Layton. Maggie is a bilingual partnership specialist with the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much to Little Warriors for having us come and just quickly share a little bit about what we do and how we could potentially be a support to you or to the people that you're connected with. So as Wanda mentioned, I work for the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. We are kind of a two-pronged organization, and so I'll talk briefly about what the center does, and then I'll touch on the Human Trafficking Hotline, which is like a branch of our organization, and some of the work that we're doing. So the role of the center itself, so the main role of our organization is to operate the 24/7 hotline. So this hotline was launched in 2019. It's the first and only national human trafficking hotline in Canada. It's similar to the one that is in the States, Polaris, if you're familiar with it. They're kind of like our sister line. And so we operate a 24/7 line for victims and survivors, and also other individuals looking for information. We also do research and data, and so this is a really key part of our organization. So if you're looking for research or statistics or different kind of topics that cover on human trafficking, feel free to check out our website. We don't have a ton of time today, but check out our website. We have a lot of research and reports that are available for you to go through, a couple of them being the human trafficking corridors in Canada and the It Happens Here report, which just talks about some of the trends that we see with our hotline and also with our service provider partners. We also work with education, so participating in these types of events and also working with local communities to educate them on the issue of human trafficking. Our organization is for all forms of human trafficking, so we cover everything from sex trafficking and labor trafficking to forced marriage, things like that as well. We collaborate with local partners and also larger networks kind of across Canada. And also we mobilize policymakers. And so we're starting to do a lot more policy work within the organization and with different kind of topics that intersect with human trafficking. Currently, that one being housing. That's been a really key need of the people that are calling the hotline and stuff that we're hearing kind of consistently across the board. And so we're doing advocacy pieces in different provinces across Canada on that issue. Can go to the next one. All right, and this is our hotline number. So it's 1-833-900-1010, and it's a confidential, toll-free, and multilingual hotline. So what that kind of means is, in terms of multilingual, we have French and English available on the hotline at all times. And then we have access to over 200 other languages through a translation service that's available in real time, and over 30 Indigenous languages as well. So it's a really great resource in Canada for anybody who's looking to access supports. It's a confidential line, and so we pride ourselves in our confidentiality. Me personally, I'm the partnership specialist, so I work with the service provider partners that we have with our hotline. But we also have hotline staff that answer calls. And then it is a toll-free line. It's available across Canada. We are funded by public safety, and we're kind of like a long-term solution and support for individuals who are looking to access supports. I will note that it's not a crisis line. It is a referral line. And so our main kind of way that we support is we will support individuals in de-escalation and kind of crisis and emotional support, but then we are referring them to other agencies across the country. And so we have over 1,000 service provider partners now with over 3,000 different services that cover anything from housing to tattoo removal to really anything that a survivor might need. So we do try to cover quite a wide variety of different needs because we don't know what somebody might need when they call our hotline. And so that's kind of our role is to, or as a partnership specialist, is to make sure that we have organizations like Little Warriors in our directory of services so that if, somebody is calling our hotline and is looking to access that service, then we're able to connect them through to to that service. So what the hotline does really briefly, we do a bunch of different things, but the first one is safety planning. And so we will speak with survivors and people that are currently experiencing trafficking and just kind of working with them to make sure that they're in a safe and secure environment. And this can be challenging sometimes because oftentimes we know that human trafficking doesn't happen just in one location. And so one of the benefits of having a national hotline is that we can connect with law enforcement partners and service provider partners across Canada really quickly and get access to safety and supports for that person who is calling our hotline. And with that, connecting them to different social services and supports. And so how it works when they call our hotline is that they're given a case number, and then they are given kind of a list of resources based on whatever their need is at that moment. And then ideally, we will try to warm transfer, which is when we connect them with the service provider directly. And then if they're needing additional supports or additional referrals, they can call us back and just give us that case number, and we're able to provide them kind of that ongoing and continuous support just based on whatever their need is at that time. Our line operates as a trauma-informed and person-centered line. We don't force anyone to take on any of the referrals that we're making. We simply offer options for that individual if they're looking to exit. The other thing that we do is also offer general information. And so we also operate as a line for other people that are looking to just understand a little bit more about trafficking. So we get calls from family members, we get calls from, concerned community members, we get calls from people who are just wanting to know more about human trafficking. And so feel free to use the hotline as a resource and a tool as well. Sometimes we can encourage people, let's say you don't understand, if there's a human trafficking red flag that you're seeing kind of with somebody in your community and you want to kind of talk through, how do I have a conversation, or can I get connected with another partner who can educate me on this topic, things like that. The hotline is also a tool for that. Or if you're a service provider and you're looking to offer additional referrals within your province or outside your province, you can always call and kind of do that case support as well on the phone with the hotline staff. So it's really a tool for everyone and anyone on the issue of human trafficking. And the last one is that you can discuss potential reporting options. And so if they are a survivor who's looking to access, law enforcement partners and connections to report their trafficking situation, that is something that we do have. We have relationships with law enforcement across the country. And so we will never force anyone or, ask anyone to report to law enforcement other than if they are a minor, we do have a duty to report. That is our responsibility. But otherwise, we really try to leave it up to the individual to decide how they would like to, move forward with their journey out of trafficking. So I think that that's kind of the general gist of what we do. There's a lot more like little nitty-gritty details, but if ever you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we're always happy to chat or to do additional education. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. So I'm going to take a few moments now just to talk about Little Warriors and our Be Brave Ranch. As I mentioned earlier, we are a trauma treatment center. We focus specifically on children, youth, and families who have previously history of child sexual abuse. And just for everyone, we are and see trauma as an individual's inner resources being overwhelmed by a perceived or actual external threat. So when we're talking about Little Warriors, we know that each child, each teen, and each family that comes to us has a different history and a different response to their trauma. We look at different types of trauma, and specifically when we're talking about child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children, teens, and families, we know that there's various types of trauma, and I'm not going to get into all of these areas, but specifically at Little Warriors, what we really do our best to focus on is the developmental trauma and attachment trauma, as well as the transgenerational trauma in our family program. Additionally to this, as we are working with children, teens, and family with a sexual abuse history, we know that our staff are exposed to secondary types of trauma, and this vicarious trauma is important for us to look at and to be able to deal with. And we do this through offering supports through what we call our compassion fatigue pods, where we have our frontline staff having the ability and really the expectation to be able to check in with other parts of our clinical team to be able to be supported, to hear the stories that are coming forward from the children and youth and families that we serve. We know that traumatized persons, there's sort of that reptilian response in the brain that happens. And so oftentimes we are dealing with, and sometimes we know that children and families are not able to, at least initially, make clear decisions because of the trauma that they're faced with, whether that's domestic violence trauma, or if there are pieces related to human trafficking directly. We know that a part of our jobs at Little Warriors is really to support and regulate and support the child and family to a more regulated arousal system. And we do that through a multimodal approach to our treatment. We have about 11 different types of treatment, which include working with the child individually within a group setting, as well as family therapy. So when we really understand what trauma looks like in children and youth that we serve, but also those out in the community, what we know is that there's this hyper arousal that happens due to the trauma and due to the response within the brain. We differentiate the reenactment of behaviors and symptoms because we know that many of the children and youth and families that we serve actually have reenacted their sexual abuse trauma. And in some situations and some communities, what we're also understanding is that many of these communities, it's sort of unfortunately what I would consider the norm to have had experience of sexual abuse trauma within their families or within their communities. And so when they are and become aware of sexual abuse traumas and why their behaviors are dysregulated, sometimes this is a surprise that comes forward. And along with the surprise, sometimes family and caregiver members are also disclosing their sexual abuse trauma, either as an adult or as a child, to us as well. We know that there's increased mental health concerns, addiction, involvement in the justice system, poor school attendance, if there's attendance at all, and the ongoing issues within the family setting. And all of these things are factors which actually increase the risks with regard to child sexual trafficking and human trafficking in general. So when we talk about what child sexual exploitation is, child sexual exploitation defined is that it's a type of child abuse where a young person is asked, encouraged, manipulated, or forced in any way to be involved in a sexual act. And sexual acts can be varied from sexual touching toward someone or of them, masturbation, penetrative sexual contact, misuse of sexual images, etc. So this happens in various different forms, and oftentimes it's very subtle, and there is almost always a grooming process that occurs towards this. Some potential signs that we have seen at Little Warriors related to sex trafficking is that a child can be identified by their caregivers as retroactively seeing them as becoming distanced from the family or the support system, that they've become involved with the sale or trafficking of drugs, that there's fearful relationships of others, sudden changes in behavior. Many of the caregivers report that over time, they can now recognize that there was different choices of friends, different choices of clothing, makeup even, and that there's mental health concerns that could be identified after the fact. Inconsistent accounts of activity or experiences, long periods of time where they are away from the home or they're leaving the home in the middle of the night. They can be in an abusive relationship with their offender, but many times our children or youth have some difficulty understanding or having awareness that this is even existing. Sometimes they have a special relationship that has been developed over time with their offender. And so there's confusion around whether or not the behaviors toward them have been sexually inappropriate. Secrecy, as we talked about previously, school truancy, unexplained clothing, gifts, money, extra phones is another factor, and association with much older men, women, or other youth, and in some cases even becoming involved in some way with gang activity. So when we are looking at what we see at Little Warriors and how this might look differently than what I think is maybe typically represented in the public related to child sexual exploitation and trafficking, is that we can see that the human trafficking, as Maggie defined earlier, is that it's about the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring through force, fraud, or deception, and it's manipulative, controlling, and quite insidious. What we see with a lot of our children and teens who've been involved or exposed to this is that it's very hard in some cases for them to completely recognize. We've also seen situations where children and teens are exploited in certain communities directly from people that are very well known to them, including their parents or close family relatives and friends, for things like housing, food in some situations. And it becomes part of the family dynamics and the trauma, and oftentimes relates back to that generational trauma. We know that sometimes there is exposure to this through friends or intimate relationships that are toxic. This can happen within the schools, malls, outreach centers, even through employers. And as I mentioned, sometimes at home where it should be safe is that there is exposure to this. And then the obvious dangers and concerns through the internet. Aspects of gaming, and I think parents and caregivers are not aware of this, even though there's been more and more ongoing education about this. But you know, gaming through things like Roblox or Minecraft, various social media platforms, various ads, for example, and the recruiting is done much more with those who identify as vulnerable. They're very easy targets. If you look at the research around this, those who are offending and predators can very easily pick these children and youth out. Oftentimes, they are picked out because of their socioeconomic status, their difficulties with regard to relating to their family dynamics, that they aren't well cared for, or that there's a lot going in with regard to the families, and there's a lack of supervision. So why, when we talk clinically with some of the youth and families that we're serving, as I mentioned, unfortunately, sometimes this is a way or a means to support their family, or an attempt, in fact, in the opposite way, to avoid or get away from trauma that's happening within their family. There is layers and layers of guilt and shame, loss of hope and self-blame. So oftentimes they feel responsible for some of the choices that have happened that have led to some sexual exploitation. And there's a lack of appropriate and or responsive supports. So when does this occur? Really, unfortunately, it can occur really in different areas. We've seen even with parental controls on internet, even at school, that there is, and some of the children and teens have shared stories that they've had access to people who have been grooming them, even through school, and some of the computers that are at school, really when there's a lack of supervision, and of course when there's concerns within the family with regard to family violence or behaviors such as other traumas happening. So as Roland as well as Maggie talked about the trauma-informed supports, we know that these are really needed when we're working with children, youth, and families on the front lines. But we also want to highlight the importance that frontline persons working with children, youth, and families, and first responders are also needing that trauma-informed approach. And for those of you, really quickly, when we're talking about a trauma-informed care approach, of course, this this term was developed through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the United States. And when we're talking about trauma-informed, there's some key aspects, one being that we're actively resisting re-traumatization in the work that we do or how we are engaging with children, youth, and families. Second is that we're realizing the impact of trauma and understanding the potential for recovery. And this occurs also when we're dealing with any type of trauma, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, is that we're also recognizing that the prevalence of this and the need for a trauma-informed approach, not just with the children and youth, but also with caregivers and service providers, is of most importance. And that, you know, for those of you who are listening and involved in other organizations or within teams, is integrating those concepts into your own policies, procedures, and practices, and recognizing that really the signs and symptoms of trauma really affect all of us. So what's good for those we serve turns out to be good for ourselves and our teams as well. Just highlighting again that frontline service providers need a trauma-informed, supportive workplace. And as highlighted in the bullets here is, you know, to question that is, are the health and safety concerns addressed? Are there employee opportunities for growth and learning and discussion? Is there employee engagement, healthy communication within the teams, and an adherence to a trauma-informed code of ethic, and of course, support for that work-life balance? And why are we talking about and why should we be considering this move and a real intentionality with regard to trauma-informed care models with the work that we're all doing in our communities? Is that we know that trauma is prevalent in the youth that we serve at Little Warriors, but also in the staff and also in the community. We know that trauma-informed care models reduce traumatization and build relationships and those connections within the community. And of course, you know, we know that we all in different ways, whether it's from the perspective of justice and law or community supports or treatment, is that we all really do need to work together to be most effective and efficient, to be able to support those in need. But other factors are that it increases life and job satisfaction for ourselves and the staff and frontline care providers that work in this area. And of course, in significant acute settings, that we know that a trauma-informed care model reduces physical restraint and also reduces staff and worker injuries. Just to go through some other factors, violence and aggression we know are self-perpetuating. So with a trauma-informed approach, it allows for more vulnerable populations to feel that they are cared about, that they're listened, that they matter, that they're a part of supporting themselves with the right supports that are given to them. We know that without a trauma-informed approach, the system itself can be traumatizing through things like huge wait lists or you know, barriers to get into programs or within programs, which is why the work that Maggie and her team are doing is so important in terms of making those connections. And of course, we know that trauma-informed care is evidence-based and guided by brain research. What I just want to quickly review, and we don't have a lot of time for this, but many organizations, many service providers feel that they are trauma-informed. And what's really clear is that there's actually a spectrum of from trauma-aware to trauma-informed, and very few organizations and systems are actually trauma-informed. We can send out these slides afterwards as well for those of you who are more interested in this, but really being aware of the differences between being trauma aware to trauma sensitive, responsive, and of course trauma informed, not only with the service that we provide in and across the community, but also within our own teams and communities. So if we're looking at some reflective questions regarding a trauma-informed support services for individuals and agencies serving those at high risk to be trafficked or who have been trafficked is, questioning, do we challenge traditional assumptions about how to provide services and breaking down those barriers? And really, are we working well and are we collaborating? And are we moving from a caretaker role to really a collaborator role? As Sergeant Missick described, Tamia Nagy is a perfect example of having a collaborator role to really support and work with understanding systems and best serving those in need. Second question is, are we fully collaborating to support those we serve and each other? Are we responsive to the impacts of trauma at work? Do we emphasize safety across all domains for both co-workers as well as those we serve? Do we recognize the interrelationship between trauma, substance misuse and abuse, mental health, early childhood experiences, and human trafficking, and respond accordingly? There is a clear interrelationship with all of these things, and if we can continue to share and talk and come together and identify gaps, we can better address the concerns. So as we're looking at protecting against sex trafficking, there's some considerations both from the perspective of supporting caregivers. So as kind of summing things up to understand internet safety, things like basic privacy settings, but also understanding and creating some prevention awareness on grooming behaviors and risk factors and warning signs, as well as providing skills in terms of how to communicate and discuss concerns. Many parents, many caregivers don't have the skills and have shared with us, certainly at Little Warriors, that they don't know how to talk about this with their child or teen. They don't know how to talk about it, with others. And so really supporting people to have the language and the awareness to speak up and to really create awareness through that sharing, both at the individual caregiver level, but also at the systems level. So at the systems level, are we looking at every part sort of owning the problem or concern rather than having different systems in place, but not really collaborating? And we know that collaboration across systems is vitally important to be able to support these children, youth, and families, as well as adults who are involved with human trafficking. For those of you, I've just put in here a quick note about what we really mean when we're talking about trauma-informed care, both of the individual as well as within our own teams, within our own families and communities. But trauma-informed care means that we're talking about a program, organization, or system that informs, that is trauma informed, that realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for healing, recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma in staff, clients, and others involved in the system, and responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, practice, and various settings. So with that, we have a few minutes. As Maggie mentioned, if there's any questions for either myself, Sergeant Missick, or Maggie, we would be happy to use the next 5 minutes or so to answer any questions. Here's our contact information for you if you want to reach out or get more information about any of the programs. So I'll turn it over to questions in the chat or anyone who might have anything more to say. And I'm not sure, Sergeant Missick or Maggie, if there's anything that I missed that you would like to chat about.
Thank you so much, Wanda. No, I think you did a great job explaining exactly what the trauma-informed approach is and how that really filters into what the Be Brave Ranch and Little Warriors Foundation does when in taking new people there. So once again, just really appreciate you having me on as a guest speaker. And I put up my contact information in the chat if anyone needs to reach out to me via email there. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Just looking at some of the comments in the chat, yes, we will have the PowerPoint available, and I believe the recording will be available as well. And if there's no other question specifically, I would just like to thank you all for taking time out of your schedule today to learn more about human trafficking, as well as how you can best support children, youth, adults, and families in your communities. And I am very thankful for our opportunity to come together with Sergeant Missick and Maggie. Much appreciation to you all.
Sorry, just going to address one question there. Sergeant Missick, are you finding a connection between children who are used to commit crimes and end up in conflict with the law as potential victims of trafficking, especially where gangs and organized crime is concerned? I think that would be a fair statement. Not in all cases, of course. We are seeing a lot of different types of trafficking where it involves youth. I mean, we are seeing the Romeo boyfriend type of trafficking, where it's the boyfriend who showers an individual who has some vulnerabilities in their personal life and showers them with gifts and money and coerces them into a lifestyle that they wouldn't normally be open to, and then they fall into that trap. I have seen situations, not so much with youth, but in other individuals where they start out as maybe a low level involved with organized crime, selling or dealing drugs, and then slowly being built up to using those drugs. And then after that addiction is sort of established with the individual, then they proceed to more their further deeper type of traumatic things like sex assault and, being recorded in vulnerable positions and then holding that over their head. And then that's where the exploitation starts. And then from the exploitation, it only gets deeper and deeper to the point where they're now ingrained in both the organized crime lifestyle, which hangs a little bit of culpability legally over their head, and their trafficker knows that, and they know that they're going to use that against someone if they decide to go to police or report being victims of trafficking. And it's also a way to develop shame in these individuals. And again, it's a total control tactic. And I always tell people who deal with the victims of crime or victims of trafficking is we're not there to look at that stuff. Just like if you come up to a person, we had a situation where a girl called saying she had escaped from a trafficking situation and had ran to a gas station, called 911 for help. She was involved in some illegal activity. She had a warrant for her arrest. Well, our first priority shouldn't be dealing with that warrant and throwing her in the back of a police car. It should be finding out if she's okay. What does she need? What are her current immediate needs that she needs to be taken care of? Yes, we can deal with those things, but that is not our first concern. The first concern should always be the individual's safety and well-being. So to answer your question simply, sometimes in some cases there is a connection with individuals committing crimes and ending up in conflict with law enforcement, being involved in as victims of trafficking. But every case is super unique. I can tell you that right now. There is no cookie cutter scenario. These are all very different situations.
There's another question, and Maggie, hopefully you can help me out on this too, but the question is, are there other agencies or organizations in Alberta that are involved in this work? Well, I can just add a couple. There's several that are involved in this work, including the child advocacy centers across Alberta, as well as the sexual assault centers that are also across Alberta's and Canada. We also know that there's in the Sherwood Park area, Saffron Center, that are dealing with sexual assault specifically. But Maggie and Roland, any other thoughts off the top of your head?
Yeah, I'll drop in the chat the human trafficking referral directory for our organization. So it has the ones that are at least partnered with our hotline, but ACT Alberta is a really big organization. There's CEASE. Yeah, there's quite a few. I would say Alberta's pretty stacked in terms of organizations that do anti-trafficking work. So it's a really exciting thing.
Just to add to that, we do have, so CEASE is the Center to End All Sexual Exploitation, and we have embedded, we call them safety net coordinators on each of the alert human trafficking counter exploitation teams. So if they do come in contact with an individual that needs immediate help support, that caseworker from CEASE is put in touch with that survivor, and they can be their sort of waypoint to connect them with the types of resources they need. Another one is Not in My City, Alberta, and again, there's a lot of agencies here in Alberta. It's just a matter of being able to know where to find them. So Maggie, I think that's awesome if you can send out a contact list that sort of shows the vastness of what resources are available here.
Yeah, and I would just add specifically for child and family sexual traumas, we also at Little Warriors, anybody who's interested, we have, and we keep an updated list on our website of any resources, research and literature around this as well. So hopefully anyone who needs or want that can find it pretty easy there as well. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. It looks like our time has come and gone. And again, thanks so much for your time. And please reach out to either any of us. It's our email information is all in the presentation. And for any of you who might have any other questions directly, you can definitely reach out. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the positive comments. We appreciate it.